Welcome to the Everyone Has a Story podcast. Like technology, the business community is changing today. It seems like more constantly than it ever has before. But the one thing that hasn't changed is really the importance of connections. But what's emerging in that field and that interest is the fact that the changing of how we get seen, how we get noticed, and how we get remembered. Today, more than ever, it seems like our networking groups, our chambers of commerce, after hours events, all these arenas that we can go to be seen, noticed, and get our word out about our business, our services, or whatever. It just seems like it's just stagnated. I have, for example, a couple stories, and I'm going to share one specifically. But I got invited to a networking group through the local Chamber of Commerce. And when I got invited there, I didn't know but just one person who invited me. So I was around strangers. But when they went around this room and they gave their 2-minute elevator pitch, it seemed like the elevator was always going down as opposed to going up. They all sounded very robotic. It sounded like they all went to the same school on how to get yourself introduced and your services introduced. So when it was my turn, they started asking me questions since no one knew me. I told them I was a business consultant. And they started asking me questions about really what they were doing and how they were doing it. So they opened the door. So I started telling them how, quite honestly, they sounded like robots. They all had the same verbiage, different name of business, a different service, but they all sounded exactly the same. There was no energy to it. There was no way of separating. So as a consumer, if I called 3 of their competitors, they're probably going to sound exactly the same as what these guys did. And as soon as I started bringing this up to them, they immediately got defensive. And quite honestly, I never got invited back, And so today, there are other ways that we can get ourselves more separated, seen, but most important, remembered. And those new ways are either being the host of a podcast, a long-standing podcast. This is episode number 202 for me, so I think I'm considered a long-standing podcast host now. There is TEDx. People who make it to the stage of TEDx and share their videos, they now seem to have separated themselves from some of the other people who are in their industry. But the other one, and the one we're going to talk about today, is being the author of a book who is in that area of expertise within whatever their industry is. And so today's guest is a returning guest, Mark Watson. We're going to talk about really what it means to have that new modern day business card, which is now being the author of a book of your area of expertise, as opposed to that relying on that little 1-inch by 2-inch business card that sometimes might look colorful, sometimes it might not. But I can tell you by my own example, I can pick up 100 business cards at a networking event today, and a week from now, I might remember 2 of the people. So those cards don't have that stickiness, effect to them. And that's what we're going to talk about today with Mark and his book. So Mark, welcome. For everybody that doesn't remember Mark is an executive coach, a mentor, and author of the Joyous Leadership, a great book that is a must-read for everybody, especially if you're in ownership or management. So Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Roger. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you back. And I know this is going to be a fun conversation like they always are with you. But before we get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about who you really are?
Well, Roger, I got started over 30 years ago in industry, in the manufacturing industry primarily. And I've always been in operations. I love operations. I'm talking about everything from the manufacturer, design, test of a product to delivery, everything from concept to delivery to the customer. I just love the operations side of the business. And I've worked my way up through there over the last 30 years. My last assignment was COO of a major company in the Midwest that makes beverage dispense equipment. And did that for the last 12 years and finally got to that age where I could retire. And decided I would just, I had written a book a couple of years, well, about 18 months prior to retirement. And it kind of springboarded a new career, unbeknownst to me. But it really has taken off. And now I find myself talking about joyous leadership a little more than I had planned on.
Well, I can't thank you enough. Now, for 30 years, you haven't done all this by yourself. You've been leading teams. And that's really the whole basis of your book, is how to get the best results out of your team, where you get a chance to come to work and enjoy your professional life every day, but so does your team. And good things happen from that. A lot of good things happen from that. And so really, this, like you said, you're now at retirement, but this book that you wrote 18 months ago has now really been that springboard to put you into another career. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. But before we go into really what that springboard looks like, let's talk about the book for a second. What made you write that book on that area of leading teams?
That's a great question. And I will say my answer now might sound a little different than when I originally started writing. When I started writing a book, I said I wrote it 18 months ago. It was actually released 18 months ago. I started writing 3 or 4 years ago. But I always mentored teams. I had engineering teams. I had also worked with a high school group that had, they call it SAMO CEOs. I worked with college freshmen that were entering the career of business or entering the study of business. And I'd work with them and mentor them, if you would. And they would ask questions. And a lot of times the questions, they seem to be the same. And that sameness of questions said, you know what, there's something not getting to these individuals early in their career. Then I'm going to write this down in a book and write this so I get a kind of a sameness of message. When I mentor these young kids and young students, or either new students, if you will, I've got a sameness of message. I know what I'm going to bring them through a certain level of information, so we're all starting at the same place. So that's kind of what started the book. I just seemed like it was a void out there that they weren't getting in the business academia world, or even in the mentoring world. I don't think it was being taught, and so I started writing, and that's where Joyous Leadership was born. I was getting asked the same questions, so I thought, well, I'll just write the same answers one time, and that's how it all came about.
So the people who have read your book, what has been their response to that?
Yeah, that's really a funny question. At least for me, I'm going to categorize those into a couple of categories of people. There's people in the business world that have been in the business world like me, 20 years or plus, and they're going, man, why didn't somebody write that book for us whenever we were starting business? And I thought to myself, I don't know. I wonder why they did not, because I did not get that information as well. And then I have those groups of students that are like, they come in, we're not being taught this in school. So they're confirming my suspicion that they're not getting this information. They're just not getting this exposure to everyday real life things that can make their job much more joyous and much more pleasurable. Not that it will make the job easy, but that we'll enjoy the endeavor. And that's really what life is about. We always think we want easy life, but it's really not an easy life. We want a meaningful life. And I want them to enjoy the endeavor of business. And that's what the book is about.
Well, and don't be modest. Tell us about the award that your book has won.
Yeah, it was a real surprise to me. A month or so ago, my publisher contacted me and said, Mark, I think we won an award. And I always thought to win an award, you had to register something, right? You had to enter. And I'm like, well, I did not enter anything, so I don't know how we win an award. She says, no. It's Independent Book Publishers of America. They've chosen you as a category winner, first place winner of motivational book. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So it's really exciting because I think we both were shocked not that we don't think the book's good or we wouldn't have published it, right? The sales have done really well. It's gotten a lot of notoriety. It's this genre. And what's unusual about that is independent book publishers, we don't get shelf space, as you may know. We don't automatically get a Barnes and Noble or whatever shelf space in the bookstores. Independent book publishing is strictly online sales. So to do that well, to be an online sale book is pretty phenomenal.
Yes, it is. Well, congratulations. So now let's talk about the meat of this podcast, which is really the modern day business card that I referenced earlier, which is either being, a long-standing host of a podcast, being a TEDx speaker on that lovely stage, or being the author of a book in your area of expertise. Well, this is what you're all about, is being an author of your book. And so tell us, how has that affected you now to the fact that your book now has become your new business card?
Well, I think, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, when I first met you, one of the first things I looked up was, I looked you up on LinkedIn. I saw you had a podcast, and I listened to a few of them. And I felt like I knew Roger before I really even met you, because I listened to your podcast and I liked them. And I was like, yeah, these are really beneficial. There's some good topics here. I made notes by a couple of them, and because you want to read them or you want to listen to them. And I think for me in the book realm, I always was used to being introduced as the COO of Budomatic. They'll say, "Oh, here's Mark Watts. He's here to speak with us. He's the COO of Budomatic," and that became my identity for 12 years. And or some other title. It doesn't have to be that title, but it was a business title. And now that all of a sudden you go to the green room or the room backstage, and they'll say, "Oh, you're the author," and you're like, you're looking around the room for the author, and you realize all of a sudden it's you. And so it is it's very different to be considered that way, to be an authority on something. But it's a little bit like the Malcolm Gladwell thing. Once you spend 10,000 hours in it, you become that authority. And when you write a book, you'll spend well more than 10,000 hours. I will tell you, it's an obsession once you get started. And yes. So it's really interesting to be classified that way. I'm very honored to be classified that way. I really am. But it was very different. It was very different.
Well, I'm going to tell you from my own, summary of your book and who you are. When I got introduced to you, the few people that made our connection, they introduced you as the salt of the earth, and your book is exactly that. And I know that having that book, all of a sudden now, network events aren't as productive as people now taking the time to introduce you. I've now, because of Zoom and because of having my podcast for over 200 episodes now, I've had, I think, all but 2 states covered by guests from 48 of the 50 states. And I think I'm up to like 27 or 28 countries of people that have been a guest speaker on my podcast. And that would have never happened without me being a podcast host. And that's the beauty of writing a book, meeting people that you would probably never get introduced to before, being a podcast host, being a TEDx speaker. And so tell us, what has the results of people now reading your book, getting to know you, and what has that now turned into your new career?
Oh, you said it exactly. Your circle of influence expands, exponentially. Not long after my book was published, I had a gentleman reach out to me from Shanghai, China, that actually mentors young teens in China, the upper level teens in China. He helps them. First of all, everything's in English that he does. He gives them a leg up more than their education. He said he'd like me to speak to his teens. And I'm like, where in the world did we run into each other? How did this happen? And it's through those you bump into someone again, like you say, hey, this guy's got a book. This is what you're talking about. Call Mark. We have Zoom now. We don't have to fly to Shanghai. We can do this through Zoom or some other method. I'll tell you one little small story. I was doing an event in Carlsbad, California last month. That flew me in one night. That I was to speak at their opening ceremonies the next morning. So I flew in on a Sunday night, got up early the next morning, got ready. I may have met 3 or 4 people before I got on stage. And when I got done, I said, I'm going to go over to the table. If anybody'd like a book signed or like to discuss, I'm available. As soon as I got over to the side of the stage, a very tall Oriental lady came walking across the room. And she said, hello, Mark. My name is, I don't recall her name now, but she said, I'm Eleanor's son's best friend. And Eleanor's son was my operations manager in Banamat in Shanghai. So I don't know how the worlds collide, but they're colliding at a faster pace now than they used to because of technology. And the business card won't do that for us anymore. It takes some mode of technology, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a book, whether it be some other electronic form. A lot of mine get bought through, electronic media, whether it be an audio or whatever. And so we're just able to transport worlds now that we were not able to do. And having a book has allowed me to do that and meet people from all over the world.
But now my one question I know that I need to ask, and I know the audience right now is asking themselves, does your circle influence like mine does? Are you 6 degrees away? Are they 6 degrees away from Kevin Bacon?
I'm beginning to think they are. I really do. My wife was actually with me on that trip, and the only person more shocked than me was her. Her mouth was wide open. She was like, how do you meet someone, first of all the way across the United States that lives halfway around the world? And I'm like,
exactly.
It's just the way it works.
Well, all right. Well, I'll give my regards to Kevin when I see him next.
Thank you.
So now let's get to the business community. How do you think a business owner, a manager, an executive, or even a frontline employee who's trying to really make a mark in his area of expertise, what can they learn from writing a book, and what can they get out of writing a book?
You and I have actually talked about this a little bit before, but one of the things I say, and I allude to it in the book even a little bit, we're all writing a story every day. We write, whether we know it or not. Even a day of pause, of rest, is writing a story. We're writing a day of rest. And so, since we're writing a story every day, let's be purposeful about that story. Let's make that story an event. And the nice thing about when you write your own story, you get to write the ending, and you get to write the events along the way. So I tell people that work for me, and my senior leaders, I remind them that we're writing a story. We have that opportunity. We have the ability to write that story. Now, obviously, we have to write it with facts, right? We have to write it with reality, the things that we can do and we're willing to do. It's not a fiction, but it is a story. And since we have that responsibility and we have that opportunity, let's write the best story that we can write. Let's make that story a memorable story. Let's make the story of winning. Let's make the story of meaning. Let's make it a story of where we're doing good for our fellow man, where we're making a difference in the world. And when I realized I had that in the palm of my hand, that made all the difference in the world.
Okay. And so let's now go from the people of the organization and the business to the actual organization and business. What can they see as benefits of having the owner, the manager, the executive, the employees writing a book, creating a podcast based on their area of expertise, being that TEDx speaker? What are some of the results that they can see from those efforts?
Well, I think the big thing is that we can make changes. We can have a day of a story of frustration. We can have a day of a story where you may have failed, had a temporary setback. But tomorrow, we get a brand new sheet of paper. We get a clean slate, and we can start over. We can learn from what we did yesterday. We can learn from what we did last week. We can learn from the resources that I had yesterday. I can learn from the resources I'm going to be getting. And I think it's a creativity. It's a painting almost that we get to create. We get to change things. We get to make new rules because it's our story. We can make the rules, many of the rules anyway. Um, so, so I'd encourage, the owner, the business leader, you're helping write the story of those in your charge, those that report to you, those that are your associates, and help them write that story. I would encourage you. I even tell my direct reports many times. I tell them, say, talk to your people about what kind of legacy are they wanting to leave in the job they have right now. Now's the time to make that legacy. And there are just so many things that we have at our disposal to make that a great story.
So when you're out in those networking groups, instead of handing someone your business card, you're now handing them a book or a link to your podcast or whatever. What benefits are they going to see personally and professionally as the business?
Well, the world has become more competitive and the world has become more demanding, probably because more is available to us. But one of the things they have by having like, for example, I met you, I didn't just have a name on a business card. I had some substance there, right? I had some things I could go check out. Cost me nothing but my time. So it was a great benefit to me. I was able to go ascertain some things that you had done, some new ways of thinking, some people you had interviewed that interested me, that allowed me to learn. We're filling a need. The need is great. I don't think the need has changed. The way the need is getting filled has changed. People they no longer want to have to look at that business card and go, let me make a couple of notes on this and I'll get back to it later. They want almost an instant feedback or an instant gratification. Let me pop that onto my iPhone. I'm going to get that podcast real quick. That's what I did with yours. I popped it right up on my iPhone. Boom. It's playing in my ear in 30 seconds. With my book or anything to do with my book, they get a book in their hand and I tell them, hey, chapter 6 might interest you and it's kind of covers what you're talking about. They can go straight to that chapter and they can start reading about teams or whatever. And then they go, oh, wow, this has got more. This has got more substance than I planned on. And so I think it gives you a level of credibility than just a billboard on the side of the road. You've got credibility now because you've got substance.
And I'm not sitting here going to even try to say that having a college diploma is not important. But the fact is that a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, a lot of teams, they want to see that commitment from someone that took the time and had the discipline to get that 4-year degree. Now, writing a book doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen over a weekend. I mean, it takes a lot of self-discipline, but a lot of, like you said, those 10,000 hours of experience to really make it worthwhile. So what can someone trying to move up in their career, how can they leverage their book, their longstanding podcast to show that discipline and to show that commitment to their area of expertise?
Well, I think it's real easy for them. Number one, you're going to, in a podcast or a book or anything like that, you've compressed that knowledge. You've compressed it. They're getting it in a bite-sized chunk, but it's huge. There's huge amounts of huge years of experience or huge years of study, huge amount of years of practice of what you're talking about. And so it's condensed. They're able to get that, and it's not just a snack. It's a full course meal they're going to take that, they're going to chomp on it for a while. And they're going, wow, there's a lot of content here. And I think that's what people are demanding now because, again, technology used to cycle. I remember years ago, used to cycle, they'd say about every 6 years. Now it's like every 6 months. So in less than 10 years, we've seen that go from 6 years to 6 months. You used to could buy a PC and you were good for 3 or 4 years. They're almost virtually outdated by the time you get it set up at your house because there's newer technology already on the shelf. And so we have to do that with the information that you talked about. Was a college degree still worth anything? Well, it's worth in the sense that you have to pay to play, right? You have to have it just to get in the arena, but it's not really worth much other than that. But a podcast or a book or some other condensed learning that I'm able to absorb at an increased pace, not go to my 3-hour class every 3 times a week, but go grab this thing and grab Roger's 30 years of industry knowledge. He's going to impart one lesson to me in 33-minute podcast. It's explosive. And it's just, and that's just the way of the book. I can take my book. I've got 19 major chapters, 21 counting the introductory and conclusion. You can take 21 chapters, you can put that on a shelf and you can mark it by chapter. And I've spent almost 40 years of putting information into those chapters. You can get it in minutes, virtually minutes. You can get it on an audio book and you can get it less than that. And so that is the way we demand to consume our knowledge nowadays. And that's what makes us credible as a resource.
Exactly. Well, Mark, once again, I can't thank you enough for being on my podcast and sharing your many years of expertise. Welcome to retirement and your new career as a speaker. I know that the stage will be set. I know you're booked out to end of September now with your speaking engagement. So congratulations on that. And the audience are going to be well in tune with you, and they're going to really get to learn from a master, in my eyes. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Roger.
So before you leave, why don't you leave us a little bit more, just some closing inspiration to move forward with maybe writing that book or being that podcast host?
Well, I would like to say this to everybody, kind of the content we used earlier, but we're all writing a story. Everybody is. If you're a housewife, you're a CEO, if you're running a small department in an accounting firm, or you're running a major department in a Fortune 100, I don't care what your role is. You're running a call center. You're writing a story every day. There's actors in that story. You're the major player in your story. You're the major actor. Write that story with purpose and meaning. And write that story with purpose and intention. And think of that every day. You get a new page every day. And make that a book or podcast or consulting service that you want to refer back to, that in 2013 of June 28th, that you did this. This is what we accomplished. This is what we did as a team. And it'll be something you'll be so proud of. And people want to hear you. They'll draw you in. And I look forward to hearing your story. I've gotten to, since I've been doing a lot more speaking and interacting with other people, the amount of information I've been able to garner from other people, such as yourself and others, has just been tremendous. I wish I had been able to done this 10 years earlier. And
absolutely,
I hesitate what I would know more. But it's been a great experience meeting people like yourself and sharing this newfound knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And Mark, if someone wants to get in touch with you just to learn more about you, your book, or get you invited to the stage of wherever they're at, how can they get in touch with you?
First and easiest, probably just send me an email, johnmarkwatson@gmail.com. Or you can go on my website, which is johnmarkwatson.com. And or just Google me. I'm out there, pretty easy to find on Google. And I'd love to speak in your group or share some information. Even just have a question. I answer all my own emails. I'm not always as prompt as I should be, but within the week, I usually get them answered. And I'll answer any questions anyone has.
Well, thank you again. And everybody, please reach out to Mark and get him on your stage, or at least get your hands on his book. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
My podcast wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for my sponsors and my great supporters. So let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of them. First of all, I want to thank Rebecca at Custom Bookkeeping and Accounting, delivering trustworthy bookkeeping services since 2003. Dave and Dara at Virtues Matter, making this world a much happier place to be with their Virtues Card app, coaching and workshops. Stephen at Buller Accounting, giving business owners depth and insight to their numbers. Eric and his team at Ivy Cat Web Design, the real superheroes of web development and design. Jennifer and Jean at the Seavers Real Estate Team, serving Pierce and Kitsap counties with their home buying and selling needs. Maury at the Maury Method, the world's only brainwave entrainment engineer, helping everyone have more clarity, less stress, and overall better brain health. Priya at Pivot My Profit, helping individuals and businesses have better control of their finances and more money at the end of their day. Melissa at the Soul Vibe Energy High, the queen of the aha moments, helping individuals find those holes in their cups, repair the hole, and gain back their positive energy. And finally, Rick at West Sound Recording. You talk, they do all the rest. Thank you, Rick, for all your efforts with the production and editing of my podcast.